I was holding a champagne glass when my sister told 200 people I was the family failure. The band had just finished a song. The room was warm, loud, full of the kind of laughter that comes easy when everyone's had a little wine. My sister Emily stood at the head table in her wedding dress, microphone in hand, glowing the way brides are supposed to glow. Everyone laughed. I smiled along with them. But on the other side of the room, one man didn't laugh at all. The mayor. He set his glass down slowly, staring at me like he was trying to place a face from somewhere. I saw him lean toward the man beside him and ask a question. I couldn't hear it over the noise, but I could read his lips well enough. "Is that Daniel? Carter?" I didn't know why he looked at me that way. I didn't know what he remembered. And I certainly didn't know that before the night ended, he'd take that same microphone my sister had just used to humiliate me and tell the room the one thing my family had spent years getting wrong. 6 years of quiet were about to end in about 20 minutes. Let me back up. I drove to my sister's wedding in an old pickup truck. My one good suit hung behind the driver's seat. I'm 58. Emily's my little sister. The truth is, we haven't been close in years, not because of some big fight, just distance. The kind that builds slowly, one skipped holiday at a time. Told myself, driving in, that maybe tonight would be different. She's still my little sister. That was reason enough to go. I had no idea how wrong I was about different. I heard the family's version of me before I even got out of the truck. My mother was talking to a cousin near the entrance. "Emily has really built something for herself," she was saying. "And Daniel? What's he doing these days?" A pause. "Oh, nothing serious." I stood there a second longer than I needed to before I walked in. Emily found me a few minutes later and hugged me the way you hug someone you're not sure. "You're glad to see. You actually came," she said. Of course I did. She pulled back, straightened my jacket collar without asking, and said, "Just try not to make tonight uncomfortable." I told her I wouldn't. I meant it. I didn't know yet how hard that promise would be to keep. Here's what my family thinks happened to me. I ran a construction company for 15 years, 20 men on payroll, good men. Most of them had families, mortgages, kids in school. Nothing glamorous, just steady. Then a contractor we depended on collapsed overnight. The debt landed on us before I even saw it coming. I spent 3 months trying to save the business. I sold equipment. I sold my second truck. I emptied every account I had. None of it was enough. I had 2 options left: protect what little I had, or use it to save my guys. I chose my guys. I lost the company, the savings, eventually the house a year later when the bank finally caught up with me. I made the choice I could live with. That's the only explanation I've ever given anybody, including Emily. To her, that sentence sounded like an excuse. To me, it's the only thing I've ever been certain of. But here's the part nobody in that family knew. Not one of them. I never told them what came after either. Not the food program, not the deliveries, none of it. Once my name got attached to something like that, it stopped feeling like help and started feeling like publicity. So I kept it quiet, even from the people closest to me, especially from them. Strange things kept happening at that wedding. Nobody but me seemed to notice the pattern. An older woman caught my eye near the gift table. "Daniel?" I smiled. "How are you doing, Mrs. Harris?" "Better than I was," she said, and touched my hand before moving on toward the bar. Emily stared after. "Her. You know her?" "A little," I said. A young waiter refilling glasses stopped mid-pour when he saw my face. "Mr. Carter, my dad still talks about you." "Tell him I said hello," I said. Then a man near the bar lifted his glass toward me from across the room. A quiet nod. I returned it without a word. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Why does everyone here seem to know you?" I didn't answer that one. She'd get her answer soon enough, just not from me. The mayor arrived during cocktail hour, and I watched him find me across the room before he found anyone else. He didn't approach. He turned to Marcus, my new brother-in-law, instead. "Daniel Carter is your bride's brother?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Why?" "Interesting," the mayor said, and walked away without explaining himself. I already knew he remembered me. What I didn't know was whether he'd keep that memory to himself. A man about my age came up and hugged me hard enough to knock the air out of me. Tom, one of my old crew. "You still look exactly the same," he said. "You're the one who got old?" I told him, and he laughed. Then his face turned serious. "You saved my family, Daniel." Emily was standing close enough to hear. "What does he mean?" "He's exaggerating," I said. Tom opened his mouth like he wanted to say more. I gave him a small shake of my head. He caught it and let it go. I've spent years keeping people from saying things out loud. Old habits. But old habits don't hold forever. Not in a room with the mayor watching. Emily introduced me to Marcus's relatives at the next table, and I felt the temperature of the room start to drop. "This is my brother, Daniel." A woman in a pale blue dress looked me over. "What does he do?" Emily laughed, light and easy. "Not much these days. He had a construction company once." "What happened to it?" "It failed." A few polite chuckles. "He's always been the family failure, honestly. Even as a kid, he never really finished anything." Someone else chimed in. "Well, at least he cleans up nice for the occasion." More laughter. I stayed quiet and reached for my water glass, turning it slowly in my hand, focusing on something small and steady while the conversation moved on without me. Across the room, the mayor wasn't laughing. He was watching me the entire time. When our eyes met, he gave me the smallest nod like a question. I shook my head. "Not yet. Not here." He didn't look convinced. A teenage server tripped near the dance floor and sent a full tray crashing to the ground. Half the room laughed at him the same way they'd later laugh at me. I got down and helped him gather the broken glass. "Don't worry about it," I told him. "I've dropped more expensive things than this." He laughed, embarrassed, grateful. I didn't think about it twice. The mayor did. I caught him watching that, too. Then it was time for the toast. Emily thanked her parents, her husband, her career, her friends, her incredible life. Then she turned toward me and I felt the room's attention shift with her. "And then there's my brother," she said, smiling. "Daniel taught me an important lesson." She paused for effect. "He taught me exactly what happens when you don't have ambition." Laughter rippled through the tables. "Everyone, this is Daniel," she said, raising her glass toward me. "The family failure." The laughter that followed was louder than anything before it. My hand tightened around my glass until it trembled slightly. I looked toward the mayor. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't even smiling. He was completely still. I stood, raised my glass, and said the only thing that felt true. "Congratulations, Emily." Then I sat back down. For a minute, the room drifted back to normal. Music. Chatter. Emily's smile, waiting for a reaction that never came. Then a chair scraped against the floor. The mayor stood. No dramatic entrance. No raised voice. He simply stood, and the room noticed him the way a room notices silence. He walked toward the microphone, and Emily's smile started to fade before he even said a word. "You called him a failure tonight," the mayor said, "because his company disappeared. A few nervous laughs started, then died out fast when nobody else joined in. Do you know why it disappeared?" Nobody answered. Emily's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. "Because when the company collapsed, Daniel had enough money left to save himself." He let that sit for a second. He chose 20 families instead. The room had gone completely quiet. Somewhere behind me, I heard my mother's chair creak as she leaned forward. He lost his company because he refused to let 20 families lose everything alongside him. A murmur moved through the tables. I saw a few people glance at each other, recalculating something. But that isn't even the part I came here to tell you. That line landed like a held breath. I watched the whole room lean in with it, waiting. There's something else you don't know. He told them what came after. How one family became 10, then 50, then hundreds. Groceries left on porches before sunrise. Roof repairs done on weekends for people who couldn't afford a contractor. Winter deliveries, when the heat went out and there was no money for the bill. A food program that had quietly fed this town for years, with no name attached to any of it. You want to know why he never put his name on it? The mayor asked. Because he told me it wasn't about him. And there's one more thing you don't know, he said. Then his voice dropped, and the whole room leaned in with it a second time. My mother was one of those families. I stared at him. I'd delivered to so many doors over the years. Quiet drop-offs, nothing said, no names exchanged. I never once connected an address to him. She was sick. Money was tight. Every Thursday, groceries showed up at her door. She didn't know who for years. When she finally found out, she told me something I've never forgotten. He looked directly at me. She said you never once asked her to thank you. I remembered a small blue house with a crooked mailbox at the end of Fenwick Street. I hadn't known whose mother lived there. 3 months ago, the mayor said, our town council voted unanimously to name the community center's volunteer program after Daniel Carter. The room stayed silent. Emily's eyes were wet. My mother had gone completely still, one hand pressed flat against her chest. People who'd been laughing 20 minutes earlier were staring at the floor, at their napkins, anywhere but at me. Emily found me later, near the doors. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. You never asked, I said. You decided who I was a long time ago. I thought you were ashamed of what happened. I wasn't ashamed of losing the company. I paused. I was ashamed I couldn't save everyone. But I never regretted making sure my men got paid. My mother approached a moment later, quieter than I'd ever heard her. She looked older suddenly, standing there in her mother-of-the-bride dress, her hands twisting together in front of her. I've spent all this time letting you believe the wrong story, she said. Why didn't you correct me? Because I didn't need you to think I was successful, I told her. I just needed you to stop thinking I was worthless. She didn't have an answer for that. She just nodded once and reached out to touch my arm the way she used to when I was small, before I'd learned to expect anything else from her. I didn't stay for the rest of the reception. Emily followed me outside, heels in her hand. I made you a joke because I needed everyone to believe I was better than you, she said. I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. Good, I said. She looked at me, confused. Because forgiveness isn't something you ask for once, I told her. It's something you prove you deserve. The next morning, I pulled up to the community center at 8. Fog was still sitting low over the parking lot, and the trucks were already lined up along the loading dock. Emily was already there. No dress. No jewelry, just jeans and a plain shirt, her hair pulled back, looking more uncertain than I'd ever seen her. You said 8, she said. You're early. I didn't want to be late. I handed her a box of groceries. It was heavier than she expected, and she adjusted her grip without complaining. Then let's work. We didn't talk much that first morning. We just loaded trucks, one box at a time, until the sun burned off the fog. It was a start, not an apology. A start. Months later, the program launched for good. A small plaque went up by the loading dock, folding chairs set up in rows for the dedication. The mayor handed me the plaque in front of a small crowd and asked if I wanted to say a few words. I asked Emily to stand beside me instead. This carries my name, I said, looking out at the faces gathered there, some of them familiar from all those Thursday mornings. It shouldn't. I told them it should carry everyone's. The people who showed up on Thursdays with nothing to give but their time. The ones who never got their name on anything and never asked for it. Emily didn't say anything. She just reached over and squeezed my hand, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like she was performing something for a room full of strangers. For years, my sister measured success by what people could see. A good career, a big house, a name people recognized. She thought I'd failed because my company disappeared, but losing a business was never the thing that defined me. What I did after losing it, did. I didn't need the mayor to tell my family who I was. I just needed them to. Stop deciding who I wasn't. That's the strangest thing about being underestimated. The people who know the least about your life are sometimes the loudest when they tell your story. The truth doesn't always fight back. Sometimes it just waits until someone finally turns on the microphone. If you've ever been judged by people who never knew the full story, tell me about it in the comments. Someone reading your words tonight may need to know they're not alone.